Hey everyone, welcome to another Ready Your Future Roundtable with my good friends Mick Rowland and Brian Hawkins. It's always good to be able to hang out with these guys and talk about a little bit about preparedness. So last time we were together, we talked. One of the things that we were going to talk about, that Mick was going to talk about, he mentioned that he had been in the process of working with this church and this pastor of raising a pig, and that they were going to use that to they were going to slaughter it, and they were going to have meat in the freezer in all the different ways that Mick has made meat out of that, and all the different ways that he's saved that to for long-term storage, I guess. Maybe, I don't know, if it's bacon, it's going to be short-term storage maybe. But anyway, as we were doing that, I was like, okay, there's something here that we can talk a little bit more about community, because it was involving the church, and it was something that I know that I had shared way long time ago about, even before I think the podcast. And so I was like, let's do another roundtable on community. And I think that's something that's always important. In fact, being in the preparedness community, that's something that everyone has always wanted to hear more about. How do we connect with other preppers? And so before we jump into that, though, I just wanted to check in. Let's check in with Mick and Brian, and let's see what you guys have been doing since the last time that we got together. Mick, what about you? What have you been doing since the last episode?
Well, the usual, still recording chapters of book 4 for the podcast. And I've been trying to push myself to write as opposed to just consume. So I've got the first chapter of book 6 written, at least in a draft form. So it's kind of like New Year's Eve resolution exercise. You just have to get up and start. I mean, the more you think about it, the less you do it. So been trying to push myself into actually writing instead of thinking about it.
Do you have a setup, like, you hear about other authors, like they have some kind of way that they do it? They set it up in the morning or whatever. You get up first thing in the morning, start pounding away at the keyboard, or is it just whenever you have some free time?
It's more like that, because there's just plenty of other chores and things to tend to, and sometimes my time gets scheduled for me, so I just have to work with it.
Yeah, all right, I hear you on that. Brian, what about you? What have you been doing since the last roundtable?
I'm doing a lot more writing, and but not for a book, for my blog. So about 4 o'clock this morning, I finished up a 32 or 3,400 word article. It was going a little long, so it's going to be a 2-parter. So, but yeah, doing a lot more of that. I've set up all my audio equipment in my new office / studio / gear room, and I can't get that figured out right now, so it's a little bit complicated. It's a bunch of podcasting equipment that I need to figure out how to get set up and where it actually works. Whether or not that's going to form into a podcast this year, I'm not sure, but it comes in handy with video as well. So I've got some new mics and stuff, and I'm going to start getting back into some video content on the blog and everything, and on the YouTubes.
That sounds good. I know that I've been writing a little bit more, at least during this break that we've had, this Christmas break. And I've got a couple of ideas and articles in the pipeline, and ready to release a longer one that I wrote here tomorrow. But also the same thing with video. I did have a couple of ideas with some videos and ways to do it. And so I just put one out there and had a little, had some good response. So I think I might try a little bit more of that as we go. But like everybody else is saying, it's the time thing. It's, finding the time to do it. I think sometimes we see people that are out there doing and creating content, whether it's the preparedness community with, the big YouTube channels and things like that, or whether it's, somebody else and they do it full time. So it's one of those things where you wind up doing it, and you're doing it because you want to help other people get better prepared. So, all right, cool. Let's go ahead and move into the topic. And the first question that I wanted to bring up is this idea of prepper isolation. I think that, that's something that I have noticed since the very beginning when I started into preparedness, even before I started Prepper website years ago. I guess I couldn't really understand it. I understand it. I know why people do it, but at the same time, I've always understood that you can't be a lone ranger. You can't do it out there. It just doesn't wind up working. But I wanted to get your take on it, your ideas. Are preppers too isolated? Why or why not? And Mick, we'll start off with you.
Well, without any hesitation, I'd say yes. And I'd say 90% of it or more is self-inflicted. So they're not isolated, and it's not a woe is me, what happened. It's self-inflicted. And when I got into the prepper world, that was one of the earliest things that gets preached at you is don't tell anybody about your preps or the zombies are going to come try to steal it. And it just seems to be part of prepper culture, is that notion of, I don't know if it's almost like a mythology that your neighbors are going to come pounding down your door and try to, roll a burning wagon under your side of your house to flush you out like the Indians used to and steal all your stuff. I think that notion gets kind of reinforced in prepper fiction. Because I'm trying to write it, I don't have a whole lot of time to consume it. But over the break here, I was using up some Audible credits and listening to some obviously pretty well established or at least well rated prepper authors. And, I ran into two instances of those in the stories where the protagonist made the mistake of sharing one egg with somebody, a starving child, and then pretty soon all of the starving neighbors wearing rags are pounding down his door to get what his food was. And in another one, it was a family that were not doing good OPSEC because they were running their generator and they were the only people with lights and food because the dad was kind of a prepper. And sure enough, the angry criminal gangs all come in the stormy night and attack the house to get their stuff. And I thought, well, does that really happen, or would that really happen, or is that just kind of prepper lore that gets passed on and reinforced in fiction so that everybody just believes it's true? So I've had to take kind of a step back and kind of wonder, would they really? I mean, if they're your neighbors, they're not going away. So if you gave them an egg, they probably would come back because they live just right over there. But, is word going to go through the starving victim grapevine that you're the one that's got canned tuna and they're all going to show up and raid you? I don't know. I'm kind of wondering now if that's exaggerated and it's become kind of a mythic lore thing. I had over Christmas, I had sort of I'll just say discovered, not rediscovered, that there was kind of an alpine area in Europe, Christmas tradition legend of a character called Krampus. Ever heard of him?
I think I've heard of that one.
He's like the evil anti-Santa, and both he and Saint Nicholas go door to door, and he's kind of a obviously demonic devil-like character, and he actually steals the bad children. Sometimes he gives them coal, sometimes he just steals them. So, it's the legend of Krampus becomes this sort of boogeyman that scare children. And so I kind of wonder, is the hungry horde, they're going to beat your door down because they know you've got a rack of food? Is that just the prepper Krampus? So I don't know. I'm not convinced.
Yeah, I kind of hear you there. The prepper Krampus, that's a good one. We're gonna have to use that one somehow in the future. I think that's an article, the prepper Krampus. Brian, what about you? Let me kick it over to you. Do you think that preppers are a little too isolated?
Yeah, and I think a big part of that is just what Mick said there. We've gotten a little bit afraid, I guess you could say. So part of it is where, like you said, where it's self-inflicted, we do isolate, even to the point to where we'll move away from people. And I think that's a smart thing, actually, getting out of the city and going out into the country and that. But then we want to try to stay closed off from community. And if you're really lucky and get into a real isolated place, you don't even have to do that on purpose because you may be, a mile or two from your nearest neighbor, but still, you can still be neighborly. But like you said, it's trying to build a community and try to hide everything you have. So it's a little fine balance there that we have with our lone wolf mentality. And a lot of it seems just like Mick said, it's part of that fictional character type of thing that we go with. We've got like internet and everything. We can probably easily be found right now. But if in that type of situation where there's no internet and phones and maybe no electricity and that type of thing, somehow everybody's going to magically know who we are and exactly where we're at and have the ability to get here and then forcefully take what's our, it's really a lot of imagination, I think, on our part as preppers. And I do believe that I believe that it's unwarranted, short of the, like Mick said, the fictional. I have over 300 books, including Mick's there, in my Audible collection, and then dozens of books on my Kindle app, and I've read most of those. So yeah, I've fallen prey to it myself. You know, I have the same issue as you guys, where we're also trying to become more public, you know, showing everything online or showing a lot of what we have online. And that's kind of like, you know, double-edged sword there, where we don't have the luxury of, you know, hiding everything behind a huge fence when we're bringing the world into our homes. So there's that.
Well, that's why you just have a brick wall in your background instead of a pantry.
Yeah, that's why I keep my pantry back there. And there's a secret door to get to it. So when they do show up here to get everything, good luck on figuring out the code to that door. You can't even find it.
You're just going to leave the hominy and stuff behind for them so that they can grab that, right?
Those
The key-
big number 10 cans that I bought with all the green beans and the corn, that's what I'm going to give away to them to ask them to leave.
Oh man,
So
that's the
Brian, with all the prepper fiction that you'd read, maybe you'd notice something that I had noticed, is that in fiction, the hungry hordes that come beating on the doors seem remarkably strong and well fed. So the idea that there's these people who are so hungry that they're desperate and they'll do any sort of evil deed to get a can of hominy, in the fiction, they all turn out to be rather strong and robust. I think those aren't starving people. You know, like with the notion of the golden horde, that this wave of humanity is going to come pouring out of the city. And I thought, well, by the time they get to my place, they ought to be exhausted and starving. I can't see them being strong enough to find a wagon to fill with hay and roll it burning against my house. So I don't know, there's some inherent contradictions in the mythology.
Well, I think it's like Hollywood, right? But now we're doing it on, you know, Audible or audio content and books, where if we told the truth the way things really are, it would be pretty boring. Nobody would read it. So you kind of have to go. I mean, they're very interesting books, and it is something where we have to be able to mentally divide reality and fiction. And I think as a lot of preppers, I hate to say this, but it's like a romantic view of the world, and it's not really the world we live in. And I highly doubt that it would be. I think a lot of people would be out there helping. We've already seen that in the past when we've had the riots and the 9/11 and all the, you know, the hurricanes and everything. Everybody comes together, and it's really shocking and how things change when the chips are down. I mean, nobody was even getting tickets after 9/11. You know, if you guys remember that. I mean, everybody felt it. And if, you know, I understand that if your kid is starving, you're going to do what you have to do to feed your child. But I think there's a limit to what most people will do. And I don't really believe that, like you said, that it's not just their strength, but their ability to get a big horde of people willing to converge on an innocent family and take what's theirs and do all the harm and stuff that would be involved with that. I just don't see that, but that might be just be me.
So the idea of the Golden Horde, I remember reading that in James Wesley Rawls's book, Patriots, right? And I've heard it come from there. The idea is that, and for those that are listening and maybe new to preparedness and have never heard the idea of the Golden Horde, the idea is that everybody that lives in the cities, that they've run out of food, they've run out of everything that they need. So everyone decides all at one time, like, hey, we're going to head out to the country, because in the country there are animals, in the country there are, people have farms and ranches and all that kind of stuff. And so you have this big group of people, kind of like, when you watch The Walking Dead and you see these zombies all walking together, it's kind of that idea. And I think that was a good point, that would we ever see something like that? Everybody, deciding all at one time, hey, there's no more food here in the city, so let's all get together and head out to the rural areas and find something to eat. I don't know if that's ever been a time in modern day history to do something like that. Now, of course, what we're talking about is something that would be very rare in modern day history. It's a time period that we've never ever experienced if it was a true the end of the world as we know it kind of situation. But I do believe that preppers are too isolated. And so let me say that somewhere the idea, like I've all mentioned, this idea of you can't tell, you got to be secretive about all your preps, has been planted in their heads, whether it's prepper fiction, whether it's articles, whether it's videos. And, oh my gosh, the videos, there are big channels out there that do the sensational videos. It's like the world's going to end today, or I heard this today and this is going to happen. And it's like, you have all these things that, the world should have ended a long time ago, and nothing ever happens. But think about it. It's really weird. It's like preparedness and supplies, food storage, water, gear, whatever you want to say here. It's like, that's the only thing that we think about when we have something extra, that would be a reason for somebody to come and get. So like, we never hear people say, oh, I'm worried about people coming and taking my books. People know that I'm a big reader and I have a lot of books on my bookshelf. And so, the Golden Horde is going to come take my books. You never hear about, hey, I've got a lot of flowers and the Golden Horde is looking for flowers, or people are looking for flowers. They're going to come and take my flowers, in my front yard, in my landscape. Or you never hear about people talking about, hey, I have extra cars, I had extra cars in my driveway and one hasn't been moving for a while, but, someone needs a car, so they're going to come take it. And I know this kind of being facetious there, but it only seems to be like this idea of prepper supplies and food and stuff like that is the thing that's always going to be the thing that people are always going to come after, when in reality, I mean, if it would be everything, it could be anything in life. And of course, there's always bad people. There's always bad people looking to do bad things. We saw that in the riots. We saw that in the looting. I think we even just saw that recently up in Buffalo with the freeze that they had up there. People were using the freeze and being without power and all that kind of stuff to use that as an excuse to loot. So you're always going to have a segment of the population that's ready to do that, especially if there's no police officers, if there's no law in mind to be able to combat that. But I don't think that's the majority of people. I go back to when we were in the height of the pandemic, right? And we were there, and I've been very vocal about this. I texted a lot of my friends, a lot of the people that I worked with in the past, and I said, and I told them, I said, hey, you need to go and you need to prepare a little bit, go get some food, some hygiene items, and if you don't need them, no big deal. You'll just use them. You don't have to go to the grocery store as often. But if you do need them, you're going to be appreciative. And when everything went down, most of those people did do that. They did go and they did prepare. And I got a lot of text messages from people, appreciative of the heads up. But I never had anybody during that time say, Todd, I am having a horrible time finding toilet paper. I'm having a bad time finding this. I'm having a bad time finding this. Do you have any extra? I never had anybody doing that. I mean, you would hear about it on social media. People would do different, write different things. Hey, I can't find this, I can't find that. Recently, we saw that with even with the infant formula that was shortage, and that wasn't even during really the pandemic. That was after everything was kind of opening up. You would see news reports, and I would read articles, or post on social media, and then people were more helpful. So and so would say, hey, my daughter can't find formula for my child, we need a special kind. And then what you would have is other people would go and look at the stores and say, hey, I found some at whatever store, you can drop by my house and you can pay me for them or whatever, or I know that this store has it or whatever. You saw a lot of that going on. So I think we need to be careful. I mean, yes and no. Yes, we're too isolated, and we still have to be careful. Just because you want to help other people and just because you want to get the word out doesn't mean you need to open up the pantry and let everybody see everything that you have. Right? I mean, you can still be helpful. You can still be out there and still help people and tell other people what, give ideas of what they need to do without giving everything up. And so I think the benefit of being a little bit more open about preparedness, or being a little bit more open about preparedness, is a bigger benefit, so that you can build that community with people that instead of, or versus being so isolated and just keeping everything to you and your family. And then when the poop hits the fan, it's just y'all, going after the world. All right, so that was long there to move into the next question here. So what are ways that preppers can build their community? And so if we believe that we're too isolated and we understand that building a community, or if we were in a true SHTF situation, that it would be better for a community to go through that together than trying to go it yourself. And I go back to Mick's books. That's kind of what happens in their city. The people start banding together and they start coming up with ideas, and people start working and bartering and all those different kinds of things. Eventually you find that in the prepper fiction, the prepper books that we were talking about. So a little bit of background before we jump into this, and I kick it over to Brian. Like I mentioned earlier, when we had our last roundtable, Mick had shared a little bit about raising a pig for meat and other ways that the church was reaching their community, and other ways that they were getting out there. And it was ministry, it was outreach, but at the same time, it was preparedness. And so I wanted to kind of bounce off of that idea. And then what are some other ways that we can build community? So Brian, I'm going to just kick it over to you and let you go for it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point with the church and physically gathering in a location rather than everybody being behind a screen. So what Mick's got going on with you start doing projects together, you start to not only to build a bond there, but to get to know one another too. So I imagine Mick has a pretty good idea on that group in his church on who he would trust and who he may be reluctant to trust. And I think those offline environments are probably ideal for building community, because we can do it all day long online and meet people hundreds or thousands of miles away, but when we need to come together locally, that's not going to work. So we have to get out of the house, and we don't necessarily have to go with I'm a prepper t-shirt, and shake hands and hand cards, although I do that all the time. I try never to leave without those type of promotional type of wear and promotional products and stuff. But that's because we're in a different lifestyle here with online. But we can't just stay online. We have to get out there. And it's not only churches, but like community events, arts and crafts, that type of everybody has interests. And if you find interests related to the prepper community, that might even benefit a lot too. I noticed that meetup.com fell by the wayside during the pandemic because nobody was gathering at the time, but it's coming back up. I've been keeping an eye out on it, and you can find it depends on where you're at, but in my area, I can find foraging, camping, cooking, all types of events. Some of them cost a few dollars, because these are people that just set up a thing and, at their own expense, and they might want $3 or $5 or $20 or whatever to attend it. And a lot of it involves classes and that, but it's also a lot of networking and all that kind of thing. And all the successful, like what were they called, those pyramid things, network marketing and all that. I think that's they realized that early on, way back in the early 80s, as far was when I started looking into that type of thing. And they'd always have their little conventions or get-togethers and meetups and all that. And that's because it brings that community together and sharing ideas and helping inspire one another. And that type of thing is kind of dwindling away with everything being on Facebook and on their screen times. And I've got a couple others here. I don't want to make this like a promotional type thing, because I'm not getting paid for any of this. But the meetup.com, there's probably other ones too. I didn't really do a lot of looking. One of the original podcasts from that Podfather, Adam Curry, he's got a No Agenda podcast, and I noticed that they have quite a community they've built all over the country, or actually all over the world, where they just go there celebrating their podcast listeners, and they'll set up groups and parties. Now it's a little bit different than our community, that's a little bit more wild, like bar type of thing, but I mean, it could be done. And then that Prepper, I just sent an email this morning. I've seen that their tickets are on holiday special right now, when it's going off as that. It's a pretty big one. The Prepper Camp at preppercamp.com. I believe that's in the mountains of North Carolina. I actually bought tickets to that one just before the COVID and didn't go. But the people go all over the world, and not all over from all over the world, but from all over the country, and meet there for a weekend. And that's really not expensive, but you have to take care of your own travel expenses, and they have a campground that you can set up in there and everything. But something like that, if you could form your vacation into something like that, that might help. Of course, that's not probably going to be local for you, and we're probably wanting to do a local. And I'm almost done here. Sorry, I go a little long. I never say the least. That's my goal. So I've registered a domain called the Prepper Pantry, the Prepper Party.com, and it's not ready yet, so don't everybody go to it. But I'm trying to form a directory of events, kind of like those meetups and all that type of thing in the Prepper Camp, to where people would be able to go into the website, which they can't do right now, so don't try it. But you'd be able to go into there and register your event or your meetup and your gathering, big or small. 5 people meeting at a coffee shop would be just fine for that. And then try to promote your event, your local event, to your community. And that's the idea behind that. Whether it'll take off or not, I have no idea, but it's worth a shot. So that's about what I've got there.
I think people will look to that, definitely. I think what I have found is that people are wanting to meet, but they're not wanting to set it up. They're not willing to take the step of leading it, right? So maybe you need to have some encouragement along those lines, Brian. So maybe some ways of how to set things up to help people feel a little bit more confident in putting together a group. I know that we did that early on in the podcast. I did that here in Houston, and we met a couple of different times with different people, and it was fun. I mean, at one point we met at a barbecue place and we just ate and talked, and then another time we met at an IHOP. I haven't done it in a long time, but I know that there's people in the exclusive emo group that live in Houston as well. So maybe that's something that we need to do here in the future. Mick, I know that you're going to talk a little bit about the church and the setup and just some ideas there. I want to go ahead and kick it over to you.
Well, one of the things that I've heard of before, years before even, is that preppers would get together occasionally and they'd do a little meetup and they'd sort of form a little group and they'd say, well, we're a little mutual assistance group, and they'd meet a couple of times, but pretty typically after a few meetings and maybe a year's time lapse, they all just kind of dissolved and went their separate ways and didn't have anything to do with each other. And I think part of that problem is that they really didn't have anything in common other than the prepping. And, if the world doesn't end in a year, well, then, you kind of didn't really need to keep doing it. So their motivation was kind of on the thin side. And what I had found, I mean, it's not like I did it by design, but what I had found was that working through the church has been a lot more successful. And I think that's because it was a pre-existing group that already had a reason to exist, and they already had mutual interests and philosophies, etc., so that there was already group cohesion to start with and a reason to exist beyond prepping. And then you add prepping to it so that they become a group that are also preppers as opposed to a group of preppers, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. And in my case, it was sort of a slow evolution of the church becoming a little more of a prepper group. I wouldn't say hardcore, like we go around in camo and call each other colonel all the time. But it started, I guess I'm going to say it started several years ago when for September, which is Preparedness Month from FEMA, that I was doing a series of adult Sunday schools talking about preparedness in the Bible, like Joseph, etc., and how it's only good stewardship to make sure that you're taking care of the people you're responsible for. And sort of the amusing takeaway that everybody remembered, and I thought that I just threw that out there, but everybody's remembered it for years, is get a can of or have cans of canned gravy on your shelf. Because if you put a little gravy on something, almost anything is edible. And for some reason, that's what they remembered. But it's turned out to be a really good place to sort of work on the prepping, because there's already people who know each other, and there's a level of trust, which is, I think, an important key. I think, Brian, you had mentioned that people that you think you can trust. If you've already got an existing group and they have some other reason to exist, you've already got a foundation for that. And even then, there's still going to be people who are more into it and less into it within the group. And if you've got another reason to exist, well, then it sort of doesn't matter if they're not that interested. I mean, if you've got a prepper group and one of them's not interested, well, they kind of have no reason to be there. But in the case of my church, it helps that the pastor is keen on the idea of prepping. Now, he's not a super prepper, but he's got his wood stove and he's got his food put away, and he's a hunter as well. And I'm afraid I sort of keep poking him, so I kind of keep pushing his preparedness, because now he's talking about wanting to do a shallow well on his property so that he'll have a non-power water source. I mean, I want to say I told you so, but I was nagging him that when they were building the house, because they said, you got a spring going right by the side of the house. Why fill it in? Put some concrete tubes on top of that and have a shallow well. They didn't do it. So now he's got to do it the hard way. But whatever. I'm not going to say I told you so. But anyway, it helps to have a pastor that likes the idea and is encouraging of it, because then you can do a lot more. I have a friend whose wife's church, he doesn't attend it, but she does. The head of the church wants nothing to do with anything like that. It's kind of an ostrich with head in sand approach to life, security, preparedness, all that. He's got a denial shield up that if I just pretend it's never going to happen, then I don't have to think about it, and it won't happen. So that's an amazing power if you've got it, but I suspect he doesn't. But anyway, having the church sort of grow into preparedness has been useful. I mean, I've been kind of surprised when you talk about the topics and just discuss the sort of realities of an unstable world. COVID certainly did that. It sort of woke everybody up to the fact that, well, you know, the store might not always have the stuff you want. And then what are you going to do? That it exposed quite a few people in the church that I wouldn't have thought of as being preppers or closet preppers. Again, with that OPSEC thing, they may all be preppers and just nobody's telling anybody. But I was surprised how many people were really on board with the idea.
Well, Mick, plus you've got like a community where I'm assuming that where you live, from your background there with all those woods, that you have a lot of people that we would consider to be preppers, and that's just lifestyle for them, right? So you probably have a lot of more self-sufficient or self-reliant community than, say, you know, some of us that like close to Detroit or something. So,
but more of a mindset. I think that's what you're saying, Brian.
yeah. So
well, it's certainly more of a fertile ground for that, because it is semi-rural, quasi-suburban for where people live. You have more of an option to do that. Whereas if you're, you know, cheek by jowl in a suburb, you know, nobody's saying, hey, maybe I should raise sheep, because that's just not going to come up.
Right.
But the CSA pig thing was kind of moving things up a notch. That on the church's property, there was a place that could house pigs, and the pastor had talked about it for a few years, that he thought, I should get some pigs, because you could make your, I mean, he hunts every year, he gets a deer at least, and so he's used to processing his own meat, and he thought, well, I could do a pig. Well, he sort of changed his mind after doing some, but well, now he can't say he can't, because he can. But it was different. But anyway, so I kind of goaded him into the idea of doing pigs, and that's worked out rather interesting. That we had one of the church families, they were raising sheep for meat on their property, because they're even more remote than I am. And so they traded. They said, well, we'll raise some sheep and we'll trade you some lamb meat for a side of, for a half a pig. And so there was kind of bartering back and forth. Now I just used money. I just bought a half a pig, but it was still kind of a DIY meat processing experience. So just to kind of summarize and not go long like some people, that I think it helps to start with a group that's already got a reason to exist. And even if the prepping falls away, there's still a group, and just add prepping to it.
I agree. I agree, Mick. And I think we're all on the same page there, because we realize that just being a prepper is not going to be enough to get us through. Part of that is the fact that we've always been preparing. I mean, we've been preparing for all these years for something to happen, and nothing has happened. People get older, people find themselves in different stages of life. You might start it when, you know, a prepper group when you have kids, and then the kids get older and then that will want nothing to do with it, blah, blah, blah. I mean, all those different kinds of scenarios play into it. But when you come from a place where everyone has the same values, like you said, Mick, that is the foundation, and then the preparedness is kind of added on to that. And so I think that's really, really important. I would say, because I've had kids and now my kids are grown, but sometimes there are, like, the kids when they would have like they were playing soccer, or they were playing football, or they were involved in some other kind of group, maybe even Boy Scouts. Those groups would have been better to start off with, you know, like, hey, gathering those people together and then adding preparedness onto that, than starting out with you're just putting an ad in the paper looking for people who want to be, you know, be in a prepper group, because those people have something in common, right? You have the soccer in common, you have the football in common, you have cheer, if your kids do cheer, you have Boy Scouts in common, right? That would be, I think that would be an easy one to kind of Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Cub Scouts to kind of do. So I think it'd be easier to find something where everyone has something in common and the values are the same, and then you start to add on preparedness. And I think a little bit, when you come at it from the point of view that, you're not ready to start hunting zombies, you're not, Mad Max isn't your favorite movie in the world, and you're hoping for that kind of world, when you're just talking about wanting to be better prepared for life's uncertainties, and there's a lot of craziness in the world right now, I think people are a little bit more open to it. It's exactly what Mick found. James Walton he owns the Prepper Broadcasting Network. I had him on the podcast a couple of years ago. He wrote a book called Community. And so not community, but come, and then the word unity. He talked about a couple of different ways to build community in your area, because that was important. He talked about community gardens. He talked about neighborhood watches. And I think that is, those types of things would be a way to get people together, and you start talking about, you do a neighborhood watch and you get people involved with that. You start talking about crime and the reason for that. And then, hey, the craziness in this world. And it's really easy to kind of have those roots kind of go out from there and lead into preparedness. Or you start talking about gardening, and you have an extra, you have a big crop of tomatoes. What do? Well, you start canning those. Okay, well, and that leads into food storage, and it's just really easy to bounce off of those to be able to talk about preparedness in a deeper way. Just like if we were to use Mick's example of the church, I think that can be, this is something that I know that I've talked about in the past, and I try to go back to find where it was, whether it was a podcast, a video, an article. I could not find it. And I've done a really bad job of just keeping up with things like this. But I know in the past, I've talked about one of the things that people always ask me is like, hey, I'm disabled. How can I form a prepper group? Nobody wants me in their prepper group. My thing is start teaching classes. Start teaching classes and bounce off of this idea of what Mick has shared there from the church, and start teaching classes somewhere. So whether that is, you do it in a civic building, going back to what Brian said about Meetup, that was one of the first entry points to the preparedness community for me, because when I started getting interested, I went to meetup.com. There was a group that was forming, and the first meeting was, there was a lot of people there, and we met in a county office, right, or building, and you could just, you could say, hey, I'd like to use this room here for a meeting, and then if no one was using it, you could sign up for it. So use a building like that. The YMCA, offer classes at church where you're offering some basic things, whether it's gardening, whether it's canning, maybe it's basic preparedness for winter time, things that you can set up there, hurricane season, whatever it might be. You start offering these classes, and you start building relationships with the people that start coming. I think you can easily build a group from there. So going back to the people that always say, I'm disabled, I can't form a group, nobody wants me in the group. If you were the person who was starting that and you were offering those classes, then people would look at you as that expert and would want you to be part of that group. You could build off of that. And so, we can go into a lot more detail there, but I think that's the idea. We actually have someone in the exclusive email group. I won't mention her name, but they live in a rural setting, and she's done this. She's offered classes, and she had a very great turnout of people who are wanting to know more, and wanting to get information. And so she's taught classes, people were coming. I don't know if she's still doing that, but I think that is a way to start meeting people that are like-minded. You don't have to, when you do something like that, you don't have to tell them, hey, I've got a year's worth of food in my pantry, or I have I've got generators that, enough fuel for generators that would last me 3 months or whatever. You don't need to share stuff like that, but you are finding people, you're getting to know them, and you can start to build that relationship with them and maybe bring them into your inner circle at that point. So I think there's a lot of options out there on building your community when it comes to it. I just hope that people will do it. The thing that I think is the block for a lot of people is just starting it, because they know that they're wanting someone else to do it, and then they want to join in with it. And if you don't find a group already in your area, then I think it's something that you should wind up doing, and starting out with doing some classes. You don't have to do full on crazy classes. You can do a 45-minute class and then have, go out to eat afterwards and get to meet people. I think that would be a great idea. So let's go ahead and start winding down here. I wanted to just have this, this last little bit here, just a quick idea, a thought, how to reach others, or how to reach out in your neighborhood if there's somebody that you want to get to know better. How can you specifically in your neighborhood, in your area? And I want to bounce off of, we have another member, and I don't think you would have a problem with me saying his name, Jeff, who has done a lot of work out in his community, and he has started volunteering. And I can't remember the specific, maybe one of y'all remember the specific group that he was involved in. I don't think it was just a homeowners association. Maybe it is, but you can easily volunteer. I know my homeowners association is always asking for people to volunteer. They're always asking for people to help out, and they're trying to do things like, people have moved into the neighborhood, and my neighborhood's an older one, but it's had a tradition. Like, for instance, July the 4th, they have a big parade. They have different things going on. They'll have like a bazaar, in the back in the back where we have our clubhouse, and so people come from all over to put up tables and sell things at their little craft show or craft bazaar or whatever it might be. And so they're always asking for people to volunteer. I think that's an easy way to start to get to know people when you do that. Yes, it does take some time. Yes, you get out there. Yes, you have to have some conversations, but I think that's an easy way of doing it, with your homeowners association. My neighborhood has a neighborhood newsletter. They're always asking for volunteers to drop off. It's like an old school newsletter where they actually bring it to your door and drop it off at your front door. And they're always asking for people, on streets. It's like, hey, we don't have someone that can distribute on this street. Is there anyone out there? And so getting involved with that. And then I have a pretty active neighborhood Facebook group and the Nextdoor app. Oh my gosh, the Nextdoor app is like, you can get on that. You can read everybody's tea on that. I mean, if you ever wanted some entertainment, just get on there and scroll. I mean, it's kind of funny. But the Facebook group, there's a lot of people always helping out. I have found on that group people to, like, when I needed a plumber, we've got recommendations there. When I needed other ideas, recommendations, it's just a really good group, and everyone's helping out. And so I know in the prepper community, we don't like our social medias and things like that. I think you still need to be very, very careful about that. But I have found that to be very useful and something that would be worth it to me to continue on there. I wanted to bring up one other thing, because, and I know that I shared this before, but National Night Out would be a really great opportunity to reach out to your neighbors. And National Night Out, I mean, there is a website for this, right? It's natw.org. And I'm going to have a lot of links for you in the description, in the show notes, so you can go check that out. But it's the first Tuesday in August, and you can set something up where maybe you have maybe you do some hot dogs and you invite your neighbors to come out. I've noticed on that night that there's not a lot of people that do come out. But if you were a little bit more proactive and like, hey, let's have a National Night Out, and you invite people over, do some cheap hot dogs or whatever, you can easily get to meet some of your neighbors if you haven't before. In Texas, if you're listening from Texas, Texas does it a little bit different. It seems like we do everything a little bit different. It's the first Tuesday in October. And so that's something to kind of consider and to think about. But those are ways that I think you can meet people in your neighborhood very easily without sharing, that you're a prepper, that you think that, times are going to get tough and you have food and supplies stored up. Mick, I'm going to kick it over to you. What do you think? How can we reach out to a neighbor or the neighbors that we want to get to know a little bit better?
Well, that's one of the things I kind of ponder about. My neighbors aren't particularly close. physically, so we don't cross paths a whole lot. But I do keep in mind that if things did go bad, grid down, or some other crisis where we're all in lockdown or something, that these are the people I'm going to be stuck with. And unlike the church, we don't have any particular commonality other than that we live on the same street. So I have to sort of set aside my curmudgeonly loneliness and go and talk to the nice people. But, making little conversations, waving as they drive by, try to be the friendly neighbor, if nothing else. But there's other opportunities, like my one neighbor was out blowing leaves off of his driveway, so I could walk over and chat a little bit. We talked about a zoning board meeting. I mean, there's things you can talk about that you've got in common, but try to start with a basis of, or a foundation of, being the friendly neighbor, as opposed to that cranky old man that says, "You kid, just get off my lawn." You don't want to be that guy. So if things do go south, then at least you've got a foundation of cordiality. But I also use the opportunity when it sounds like I'm spying on them CS or CIA style, but just seeing what they're doing, knowing a little bit more about them. I've got one neighbor who's pretty obviously a gun enthusiast. That's good to know. I've got another neighbor who's a lot more DIY self-sufficient. I mean, he's got a little Kubota tractor and he's always doing something with his little tractor. So, I have a little more of a handle on him. The other neighbor is much more of the suburban professional, where he's got a wife and 2 kids. He goes off to work every day, and wife gets him on the bus for school, etc. So, they're in different places, but just getting to know your neighbors so that you know who they are. You got to start with that.
Good point. Good stuff. What about you, Brian?
Well, those are good points. One thing you can do, and I brought this up, I don't remember if it was, we're doing so many videos, I don't remember where I mentioned this, but you could shoot at your neighbor and you would get a good idea if they're a gun enthusiast or not. So when I accidentally put a hole in my front door, I had to go to my neighbor across the street and make sure I didn't kill somebody. So when I had to get them, well, when they're like, yeah, everybody's okay, I don't see any holes or anything, what kind of gun? And then they bring you into your house and show you their collection, and it's like, wow, I had no clue. So that's one way to meet your neighbors, shoot at their house.
No, Brian, we don't want to do that.
Okay, well, I guess I should encourage. But then I'm not a people person, but I'm also all right with, somebody moves into the neighborhood and they come over and ask for a specific wrench or something, and next thing you know, you're out in the garage talking to them for a few minutes. It doesn't take but a few minutes to learn, to get an idea if that's somebody that may or may not fit with your outlook, and a couple of questions, it doesn't have to be political, but it could be, or freedom, or if they start talking about, yeah, there's too many this or that on the street and we got to crack down, that kind of thing. And then maybe you can take that into a backyard barbecue. You don't have to take them into your, give them a pantry tour or anything like that. You don't have to talk about prepping. You can just get a feel for it. And just see if you generally get along with those people, your neighbors, and see if you can develop a friendship, not with the ulterior motive of, bringing them into a prepper group, but just knowing your neighbors, knowing them and their children and keeping an eye on one another is a huge benefit. Like Spirko likes to say, in good times or bad, when somebody sees somebody lurking around in your backyard and you're at work and they have your phone number and like, hey, are those people supposed to be in your backyard? And yeah, I hired them to, take some tree limbs down. That's a benefit to us. And we've got to develop a little bit of a relationship before we bring them. What was that one movie? Meet the Parents. Before we bring them into the fold. Oh no, into the circle. So we don't want to just bring everybody into our circle all willy-nilly and stuff. We want to get to know them, and you can't do that by staring out the window, through the crack in the blinds and seeing who's staring at your property or something when they drive by too slow. Get out there and wave at them. Hey, how you doing? And that also lets them know that there's real people living there. It's just not a building. So.
Yeah, I think about my son was just telling me about his neighbors. He's much more in a suburban development. And, the lady behind him, he says she's really friendly. They stand and talk when they're going out for walks. The other neighbor is kind of accident prone. So things tend to happen and he needs help a lot. Not I've fallen and can't get up. It's just anyway. But the other neighbor, he refers to them as the CIA agents because they almost never see them. And if they do see them, they don't wave and they just drive away. I mean, that's the kind of neighbor that you're probably not going to turn to and if things get difficult because you don't know them and you don't trust them. So I guess the advice from my son is don't be the CIA neighbor.
Very good. Hey, I do want to remind everyone that I think it was about a year ago, I did release a 5-day build your own prepper group challenge. It's completely run through email. And so it's email, but it's little short videos to give you ideas of how you can build your own preparedness group. And so if you want to sign up for that, I'll have a link in the description and you can sign up for that. And like I said, you'll get a video a day to help you to look at your neighborhood and look at the world that you're in and to help you build your own prepper group. And so I'll definitely link to that, as well as linking to a couple of the other things that are there. Mick, do you want to share really quickly about the link that you're going to provide?
Yeah, I did a blog post on my piglet to pork chop experience just for people who haven't done anything like that. I mean, if you live on a farm and you do it all the time, you go, well, duh. But if you haven't, well, that's what it was like for me. So it describes that community experience and raising the pigs and then processing them yourself. And I even had to roll my sleeves up and learn how to make sausage. So there's quite a bit of DIY in it. So yeah, there's a link to that blog post.
Cool. And Brian, what about you?
Well, I can invite everybody to go to Next Step Survival. I'm a little bit more active on there right now, but I don't really have a particular article.
What about the prepper party? When is that going to be ready to go? The prepperparty.com.
It's actually up right now. You have to put the in there. It's crazy, but now they want like 10 grand or something for prepperparty.com. And it's not even registered. They just consider it a premium domain. It's crazy. Anyway, theprepperparty.com. It's up there now, but there's only a few events on there. I would like somebody to go on there and try to post an event and see if it's actually, because it's supposed to have that functionality, but I haven't tested that yet other than when I'm logged in. So that would be beneficial to me, but it's not really launch ready right now, but yeah, I am working on it. It's turned into be another project that I needed like a hole in my head or another hole in my head and way more work than I had originally thought. I thought a lot of that stuff would be a lot simpler. It will be once it more and more people go in there and add things and all I have to do is be an admin, but right now I'm still trying to develop and organize the site, and that's a little bit of work.
Okay.
I did want to bring up one thing though, if it's okay. Are we short on time?
No, go ahead.
So I just wanted to bring it back around to how we started, and I do have a YouTube channel, and there'll probably be a link to that too. But I don't do a lot of videos. I'm getting back into that. And what my biggest video was a prepper pantry. Speaking of showing the world your preps, I did a pantry tour, and that was by far my largest video. And I think I got 1,000 or 2,000 commenters on there. By far the biggest negative comment that I got was, "You're crazy to put this out. People are going to come and steal your food." And that's even in, like right now in the good times. That's not when the chips are down. So, in an SHTF event or anything, people literally believe that somebody's going to kick my door down and come into my house and take my cans of corn. They're going to pass up the $50,000 pickup truck in the driveway and the 70-inch TV set and all the other things in the house that everybody else down the street's got, and they're going to go into my pantry and take my cases of corn. It's just amazing, that mentality. So I just wanted to bring that around real quick and say we might need to reel back a little bit on the paranoia, because I don't really think we're that in that, and I'm, we're exposed a little bit more than the average person. So if you're just, using some common sense and using some of the measures that we took with trying to gain trust and to get to know your neighbor, I don't think that there's really that much risk in eventually letting select people understand that you're into a little bit of preparedness and that you lead a lifestyle of not paranoia, but trying to build a community and bring them, into doing some shared events or something. So I just want to bring that little paranoia thing that we have as a community back around real quick.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And it goes back to somewhere along the line. There's some myths and things out there that have been just, I don't know, foundational in the preparedness community, and we really need to start looking at that again. Even when you had China that was completely locked down and people are starting to protest over there. You didn't have that. You didn't, people are protesting against the government. People are protesting against something else. They're not going into people's homes, and even, they are hungry. They don't have the food like we have, and that was crazy nuts. But people weren't going into each other's homes trying to find food. They were upset at the government and things like that. I think by the time it gets to a point where people are really going door to door looking for food, there's not going to be any food left. If we're really ever in that kind of a situation, Mad Max, zombies, whatever you want to, I think by that time, everything's going to be gone, right? It's hopefully you would find like a bunker, like the guy finds in the movie The Road, and he finds one that's completely stocked that somebody forgot about. Hopefully that's what you would find. But I think for the most part, everything is going to be gone. But that's just me. All right, guys. Hey, I'm going to go ahead and end it there. I appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts on building community in the preparedness community and reaching out to our neighbors and to the people that are out there. This is such a big topic. We could continue going on, and we can go so many different routes. But I appreciate you taking this time. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and end it. Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks. Bye now.
Bye.